are listening to The Bell Post. Welcome to episode 41 of The Bell Post. Who would have ever thought we'd do 41 episodes? But today we're going to be talking about, have we reached a breaking point? And our guest is Anne Marie Schubert, who is a former DA from the state of California. Welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, just to say you're a former DA, it's like you're a career district attorney's office employee. Talk about your history for just a little bit.
Halfway through law school, I interned for a judge in San Francisco and then the DA's office. And I just realized this is it. This is what I found in life. I feel very lucky. And I never looked back. I passed the bar and began as a career prosecutor in 1990. And that's it. I worked all the way up until 2022. I retired last year. I was fortunate enough to be elected in 2014 and became the DA of Sacramento. And it was a great ride. It's a great profession.
I think people in Texas don't realize, there are 254 counties in Texas. There's not a third of that in California. So when you say you're the elected DA in California, that is a big county that you're representing.
It was, I didn't realize that until I got out into the national scene of DA's offices. Yeah, most DA's offices are pretty small. Sacramento County is 1.5 million or so now. The office itself has about 170 prosecutors. It has a crime lab. So it is a big office. We sadly have a fair amount of crime, just like many other urban places do. But it is a business in a way because it's a large law office, basically, that you're managing, essentially.
No, it's a huge law office. It's not just like 7 attorneys, which is what I would base my experience on, or even, when I was in a large firm, which would be 100. We're talking, it'd be one of the largest law firms in the county if it was
Yes.
a private law firm.
Right.
I can't even imagine that. I can't even imagine the office politics in an office that big.
Yeah. I was very lucky because I think because I was a career prosecutor, I had great support. But the thing that people, yes, we are a public safety entity. We're out there to, hold people accountable, all that, but it's an office. So you have issues like any other business has, personnel issues, whatever, budget issues, those kinds of things.
One of the things this kind of whole last few years has taught me is, one of the jobs of the prosecutor is to stand up for the victim in the courtroom. And if the prosecutor's not standing up for the victim, who is when you're going to trial in a criminal case? It doesn't seem like anyone is.
You're absolutely right, Ken. What we're seeing around the country and in several places in California is, quote, elected DAs, who some of my friends call imposter DAs, but that really aren't. They're not there for victims' rights. They're there for the criminals' rights and to do everything in their power to help them rather than crime victims.
When this hit home to me was when I saw a report in the news about the DA's office in LA where, their spokesperson was saying in response to a question about the victim, they were like, well, we just have a disagreement over who the real victim is, intimating that they thought that the criminal defendant was the real victim, not the person who had the crime committed against them. And I'm like, boy, that just turns the whole system on its head. Nobody's there arguing for the victim then.
Yeah. And that has really become a lightning rod, particularly in Los Angeles and in Alameda County, which covers Oakland, is you've got 2 DAs there that have made it very clear that they're going to essentially dismantle the system, resentence everybody. Imagine what it's like as let's say, a domestic violence victim, and you finally have the courage to stand up and say what happened. And the judge says, Mr. Jones, you're going to be sentenced to whatever, 12 years. And then the DA comes in and says, no, I think we should resentence him and let him out. It's atrocious what's happening.
When I prepare for podcasts, I like to do a lot of preparation. And so, to see if we're at a breaking point, maybe we are, maybe we're not, maybe you'll agree that hopefully we are, but I always like to see where we've come from. And, I learned a lot this time in preparing to talk to you, because if you go look at California and the history of what I would say essentially decriminalization, there is really a point where it started, and it wasn't talking about crime. It was talking about medical care for people
Right.
in the state prison. And you go back to a case entitled uh, Plata versus Brown from 2001. Can you kind of
Right.
talk about that case and what it involved and how it set the stage for this whole push for decriminalization?
Right. So the particular case you're talking about was a lawsuit basically asserting that there's inadequate health care for inmates in the state prison system. And as a result of that litigation, a three-judge panel was adopted, and there was a number given to the Department of Corrections that you have to get to they're overpopulated jails or prisons, and so they had to get to a certain what they call design capacity, meaning you could not have 137.5% of capacity, and so they were essentially um, Governor Brown was kind of forced into a situation like, what's our options here? Build more prisons or reduce the prison population? And they opted to reduce the prison population. And since that time, it's really been this, as I would call it, a tsunami of, of public policies that are really having a tremendous impact on
Well,
public
if you
safety in
look at that
California.
case, that case started in 2001. It really went on
Yeah,
almost a decade before, because it started out with someone took over the medical treatment. So they
right,
tried other things. But what
right.
really surprised me was how crowded the California prisons were to start with this. To have a three-judge panel mandate that you have to reduce your population down to 137.5%. I mean,
Right.
how crowded were they to start with? And I think they were almost up to or even past 200% of capacity.
Yeah, there's no question. I think that they were crowded. I mean, I don't think anybody really disputes that. And the question, I think, the policy question was, okay, what are we going to do? We're going to build more prisons, or are we going to reduce the capacity? And so, it's not politically, um, accepted really anymore to try to build more prisons. And so, a different path was taken, and there's been all of these things since then that has grossly reduced the prison population.
With the benefit of hindsight now, you can look at all those things that, we can touch on and say, well, how would you expect any different result than what you've got now? But I mean, at the time, so like you said, they had two choices. They could build more prisons or they could divert people out of the
Right.
state prison to other places. And so, I found that there was a bill from the legislature. So I guess it was in 2011, AB 109. And
Oh,
that
yes, very
was
familiar.
yeah, they called it a realignment. So they took people from the state prisons and they moved
Right.
them to the county jails, and I mean, it seems like it kind of comes with this. Hey, it's a good idea. They can still stay in the jail. They can still serve their sentence. It's up to the local people what they do. So it's kind of like they took a middle ground. We're going to shove it off the cost of it to the counties and just let them decide what to do.
I think I learned as the DA, if you ever hear the word realignment, it's a
Hmm.
dump and run from the states to the counties.
Yeah.
It could be realignment of foster care, it could be realignment of social services, whatever it is. But AB 109 was one of the most significant shifts in
Hmm.
California public safety because it really did dump these problems onto the counties, of which the county jails were not equipped for long-term inmates. And so the same problems that existed at the state level with healthcare were now the lawsuits were now being targeted against the counties. And so even Sac County has a consent decree as well. So that's the thing, is that, they just shifted the problem.
Today, when you start telling me about a consent decree, because we've seen that in Harris County, to me, it's just a weaponization of the federal court to get the result that you want and have a
Right.
court order. And you say, oh, my hands are tied, but you agreed to it.
Right. Right. That's the bottom line.
Well, I will say, I thought it was interesting that case, for Plata versus Brown, it finally was Plata versus Schwarzenegger, but it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was a
Right.
5-4 decision, and Kennedy wrote the opinion, and I thought it was very interesting because the dissent made arguments that you just see being made today by the Fifth Circuit, were arguments such as, we can't approve the release of 37,000 convicted criminals. And then another group of dissenters saying the federal court should not get involved and micromanage criminal proceedings at the state level. And, that's an argument that the Fifth Circuit just made in a en banc opinion in the Daves case that's now up at the Supreme Court on a petition for writ of cert. And I think the county's response is due September 1. So, I mean,
Mhm.
the makeup of the Supreme Court has changed drastically since this case, Plata. And
Right.
if they were to take it, I think, they would have the opportunity to reverse all that. And they may, but I don't know. I mean, but
I
just
don't
go ahead.
I'd struggle with whether or not our current, atmosphere in California would wanna take something up like that.
No, but like there's a previous case in Harris County called O'Donnell. Well, when the Daves case went up, the Fifth Circuit said, we're reversing O'Donnell. And, the county doesn't have the political will to go in and ask the court to change it, even though it's been
Right.
reversed. Now the Fifth Circuit has said it shouldn't even have been filed in federal court. And they
Mm.
still won't go in and ask the court to vacate anything. And I'm hoping that they're just waiting to see if the Supreme Court grants cert on Daves, but I probably would agree with you. They probably are the same as California. They don't have the political will to go in
Yeah.
and do it. They don't want to. But I
Right.
mean, we'll talk about that as we go on. But so a you have a federal court ordering them to reduce their capacity, and then you have the states shoving that to the counties, and then you have these
Correct.
consent decrees saying, "Hey, you got to provide proper medical care." And I found it very interesting. The focus was just on medical treatment, not and providing sufficient medical treatment. But what was the result? I mean, are the state jails still almost at capacity now?
Oh, yeah, no question about that. I mean, the reality was, give you an example. You have a guy that's convicted of a felony drug sales case. Maybe he's got a prior conviction and he gets maybe a 12-year sentence. I mean, are we really going to house somebody in a local jail facility for 12 years? And so
Yeah.
what's happened is that it's very similar to what happened in the state system. They're releasing people early. They're not serving full terms, or there's no room at the end for the lower level offenders that we would like to
Mhm.
keep. So the misdemeanants are not kept. You end up with all these high failure to appear rates. I mean, it is a
Yeah.
snowball effect of what's happening.
What you see in California, we can see mirror in Harris County because Harris County
Yes.
is Houston, and they started with essentially, I mean, a commissioner inviting a activist plaintiff attorney to come in and sue the county, and then it's just gone
Right.
downhill from there.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so we have this magical realignment. It's going to solve all of our
Yeah.
problems. I can't believe the counties just didn't come up in mass to kill that bill because of the cost to them.
I think they were promised that they'd get a lot of funding from it. And,
Oh.
it's just, it's really created a lot of problems.
Well, if you look at the timeline, then it's like a year or 2 years later, or just 2 or 3 years later, Prop 47 comes along. And I mean, Prop 47 is something that I talk about a lot because if you look at that and lay it out from the history, you can see quite clearly that the purpose of Prop 47 is to do a lot of decriminalization or give the counties the option for decriminalization. But that's not the way it was presented. We're just going to change certain felonies to misdemeanors. That's going to help people find
Yeah.
jobs. It's going to be great. It's going to be great we'll be safer. And that's not what happened. And I don't think now with hindsight you can say that was the intent.
I think what I've said, and probably fairly sarcastically, is that 47 was the biggest con job in
Yeah.
California history. I mean, it was,
Mhm.
literally, figuratively, but it was also, the voters were sold a bill of goods and basically
Yeah.
promised, oh, they called it whatever, the Safe Schools and Neighborhood Act, or whatever it
Yes.
is. We're going to get people help and treatment, all of that. Most folks get behind. We want people to get in treatment, to get treated, maybe don't commit crime. But the money never materialized. Um, to the extent that it was necessary. And what you've seen is an explosion of not only kind of drug crimes and quality of life crimes,
Yeah.
but you've seen this explosion of homelessness and drug addiction that
Mhm.
is just wreaking havoc on communities across California.
Well, when I look at Portland and people say, "Oh, I was on a podcast I think yesterday or a couple of days ago, and I mean the host was adamantly against drug crime," and I'm like, you know, you
Like
know,
charging a drug crime?
yes, because and I'm like, when you give up on drug crime, you're giving up on crime because almost all crime kind of is an offshoot, or it can be traced back to the drug trafficking. So you're giving up on 80% of crime if you give up on drug crime.
And we're also giving up on that person having any incentive for treatment too.
Yeah,
That's the
well,
problem, is that when they fry their brains on methamphetamine or fentanyl or heroin, They don't have the clear capacity to say, yeah, it's time for me to get help. That's the
Well,
challenge.
that's the best point right there. We're turning our backs on people. I mean,
Right.
I have a sister who had a car accident in '89, same, year we graduated from college. That's law school. That's the reason why I remember it. And she had a 30-year drug addiction for painkillers
Yeah.
after that. And I tried to get her put in jail because, back then that was the poor
Yeah.
families drug rehab. We've killed the poor families drug rehab. I mean, we really have.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
and look at
Yeah.
Portland. What's happening? You're having record overdoses every month. So we're making it where people are just killing themselves. And you know what?
Well, it's not just the drug addiction because yeah, we all have empathy for people that have addictions, but for people to support those habits, they have to commit theft.
Yes.
That's what they're doing. And so it's not a victimless crime. People, you steal a guy's tools out of the bed of his pickup truck so you can go buy dope. Well, that's a guy that no longer has his tools to go do his job.
Yeah.
So, anybody that wants to tell you it's victimless crime, I don't think has experienced it in person themselves.
Well, I even said about property crime. I mean, but I don't think people even say now it's a victimless crime because look at uh, Walmart can't sustain $25,000 a day in shoplifting.
Right.
Walgreens can't sustain $25,000 in dollars a day in shoplifting. But now we're getting to
Right.
the point where businesses are closing. They're not operating
Hmm.
in commercial spaces because they don't feel like they can provide a safe place for their employees to work. Now, I mean, if
Yep.
San Francisco has a 35% occupancy rate on commercial properties, that's not sustainable.
Not sustainable. The tax base is going to be gone. People don't feel safe. Why would especially since COVID, if you think about it, like if I work downtown San Francisco, LA in a big high rise,
Hmm.
and I have to go from the train station to the high rise and I have to climb over people or I'm scared of people, but you have
Yeah.
the option of sitting in your house looking out a nice window, what's the option you're going to choose? But think
Yeah.
about the impact on that community, that the restaurants surrounding the high rise. Just how about the owners of the high rise? What are we going to do with that? Where's that tax base going? It's just like I said, a tsunami effect.
When I was preparing for today and I was looking at the timeline and the history, you can't look at Prop 47 today without saying the goal of 47 was to decriminalize. And my
Yes.
criticism of that is there were right wing think tanks that supported Prop 47 saying it's the right thing. And I'm like, were y'all freaking crazy? Did y'all just not do your homework? Did you not even look at this objectively? Did you not even say, hey, we got to be careful for the potential? Maybe it won't
Right.
happen. But no one raised any issue about that at all. And then we have
Yeah.
very quickly right after that, we have Prop 57, which was kind of to expand that even further. I don't know if I even understand what Prop 57 did. Do you remember?
Well, oh yeah, because I was the main plaintiff trying to sue the governor on it because we were trying to challenge the title and summary. But Prop 57 basically allows for the early release of dangerous people from prison. And it has provisions in it that allows people to get out at a fraction of their sentence. They claim it's about them getting education and rehab in facilities, but the data shows that it's almost less than half that are actually getting it. Let's just be honest here. If you have to reduce the prison population, there's two ways to do it:
Yeah.
build more prisons or let them out. And this is their way to let them out. They will spin it every day long to try to make it act like it's a good thing. But again, I mean, part of the problem is that they build this to the public as, oh, we're only going to let nonviolent people out. Well, people don't know that California law is grossly inadequate on what is a violent crime. So you can commit a felony domestic violence and have a horrible record. That's considered nonviolent, or rape of an unconscious person, or human trafficking of a child. And we cannot, I mean, literally, they can get out at 25% of their term and they're just repeat offenders. So what we've seen since about 2006 is a reduction of our prison population from about 170,000 to about 90,000 now. I mean, and then you got COVID and we let out almost 30,000 people. So, don't ever let a crisis go to waste if you want to achieve your goals. So they basically letting people out allegedly because of COVID.
Well, I'm looking at this from, this is what California's gone through, but what is the lessons to like Texas and the other states about, when people come to you and say, oh, we can release more prisoners and we'll be safer. I mean, I think the lesson from California is very clear. That's not true.
I think the lesson from California to me is one, they're coming to states near you, the advocates that want to either, whether you call it abolishing prison people or the criminal justice quote reform. But, one of the things that I've always said as a public safety person, listen, I believe in rehab. 100%. I believe most people will get out of prison someday. But if we don't have a balance of meaningful accountability and
Mhm.
adequate rehab that's actually funded. So if you don't have the infrastructure to let people out and to be successful, it's going to fail, right?
Yeah, but I'm gonna argue that can we ever have the infrastructure to help rehab drug addicts enough? Because the failure rate for that 75%. So you're always going to have a high failure rate. So you're always going to have to, if you're going to do it correctly, you're going to have somebody fail. You're going to put them in prison for a time, a year, 6 months, bring them back, give them an incentive to go back, maybe fail again. But each time there'll be a bigger percentage of success, maybe. But that is expensive. And I don't know if it
Right.
will
But
ever be funded.
we're not putting in California, we're not putting drug users, just those types of crimes in prison. They don't go to prison. Prop 57 is letting out the most serious
Mhm.
and dangerous people. And what's happening is they're being let out without adequate rehabilitation. And so that's to me is we owe it to our society and you owe it to crime victims because when
Absolutely.
Mr.
Well, to
Jones
the
was sentenced to
defendants
12 years,
themselves, the
yes,
defendants
we owe it
too.
to them 100%. And so, we'll get to spin every day of the week from our prison system saying, oh, recidivism's down. Well, really look at the data. And it's just,
Mhm.
to me, we're missing the boat on that meaningful accountability too, if we're letting them out in less than half their sentence.
Well, I think you got a good point there on recidivism because I, I've seen too many examples of cooking the books on recidivism. Because if
Yeah,
California prisons are cooking the books, I know Harris County, their master was cooking the books because the DA, who was a Democrat, issued a report saying no, it's not correct. It's much higher. And then you have New
right.
York, you have a DA coming out saying recidivism is much higher. So, I mean,
Yeah,
is as an attorney, we should usually agree on the law. Now, we may disagree
right,
on how to apply the facts, but if we can't even agree on simple
right.
statistics, how can we ever find a compromise?
The other thing that is a big piece of the puzzle that is often missing is people say, like in California, the advocates, oh, 47's working, theft is down. Well, the fact is, theft is not being reported anymore.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
it's probably somewhere around 85% of theft is not reported. And that's because the retailers, the businesses, the average citizens are sick of it because nothing's happening. Now,
Yeah.
why call the cops if nothing's going to happen?
Well,
And
it's
then
worse
you
than that.
add,
It's worse than that. Why would you put a spotlight on yourself with the bad elements of society and have them come back and punish you because they're not even going to be in jail very long?
right. And then you've got even the people that in California now, if you go into Walmart or whatever and you rip them off, you're going to get a ticket. That's what you're going to, it's like a speeding ticket. And what's called the FTA rate, the failure to appear rate is astronomical
Yeah.
because you might just find the ticket, crinkled up in a garbage can and they never show up.
Well, and that's one of the things, what has been the impact on the criminal justice system since 2010, 2011 in California. And, my understanding is, you know, the first thing is misdemeanors. I mean, it's impossible
Right.
to close a misdemeanor now. I mean, if you've got, I mean, I think I talked to the DA from Yellow County, and he was saying there's like an 80% failure to appear on misdemeanors in California.
Right. Yeah, that's probably in line with what most DAs will tell you. It's just, I mean, why come to court if no one's going to come looking for you? And if
Well,
there's, I mean, there's
why have misdemeanor
why?
courts? I mean, that's what Harris County's doing right now. I mean, they entered into a settlement where you have to miss at least 2 or 3 times before they can even do anything to you. And then they don't have the political will to do anything. I mean, there's harriscountycourtwatch.com that says on average over a 2-year period, there's at least an 80% failure to appear rate in the misdemeanor court. That's consistent
Right.
with what California has experienced. And it's like, well, we know that if you go follow this regime of no accountability, releasing everybody for free, that's what you should expect. And nobody seems to be talking about that.
What I've learned in this over the years is average folks that are just raising their families,
Hmm.
taking their kids to school, whatever it is, they don't pay attention until they're personally affected.
Mhm.
They don't pay attention to public safety until they are affected. Then they're like, what do you mean the guy got out of prison after only half his sentence? Or what do you mean he got out on zero bail? And what I think is happening now, particularly in California, we're sliding off the edge here. I mean, look around. Look around. Our downtowns are being destroyed. People don't go to work. You can't take your kids to the park anymore. We're setting up tent cities and soccer fields. And so when you look around, I think what's happening is people are seeing it. They're sick of it. They're fed up with the drug addiction, the quality of life crimes that they're seeing, and now people are starting to focus up. But until people educate themselves, vote for elected officials that actually are going to do something and not just pontificate, that's what needs to happen. Is that the laws in California need to change, and we need to support meaningful rehabilitation and meaningful accountability.
I saw somewhere, I think an assistant DA from LA, I think Eric Sadal, maybe
Oh yeah, Eric's a
he
friend.
was quoting a number that said, 50% of all murder victims in the United States are young Black men.
Yes,
And they're
probably right.
being murdered by young Black men as well, normally. And so we're somehow our criminal justice system got turned on its head at some point, and we are more concerned about being lenient on the murderer, and we're forgetting about the victim. And that's kind of true for a lot of this criminal justice reform. And what we're forgetting is the same minority groups that they're saying uh, are not being treated correctly in the criminal justice system. It's that same minority groups that are the victims. And when we have crime rise, it rises faster in those communities for whatever reason. And that just seems like we've turned this argument completely on its head.
Well, I've said the same thing that Eric has said, which is, we have to acknowledge that there is disproportionality of people in prison. There just is. That's true. But we also have to acknowledge that there's disproportionality on who the victims are. And I think in LA County, it's about 70% people of color, African Americans and Hispanics. And so what do you tell that mother of that child when someone comes to him and says, well, I'm so sorry because, XYZ. So to me, we're harming those communities
Mhm.
when we sit there and say we're going to weaken accountability to particular individuals.
Well, we're discounting crime on those minority communities. When I first moved to Tyler, Texas, which is Smith County, very conservative county, um, the district attorney there or here for a long time just got reelected by large numbers. And I was told that the reason why he had such support in the minority communities was because he did not discriminate on crime. He treated all crime equally, no matter your racial makeup. And I
Hmm.
thought, well, who would ever thought we did that differently? And so
Right.
obviously there's been a time in our history where we discounted crime on certain racial groups. And it seems like, I mean, you can argue that what we're doing is we're repeating those same mistakes, and we're discounting crime and now maybe it's because it's our inner cities and it has a higher concentration of those same minority groups, but we are discounting crime for certain minority groups.
Well, and to me, I 100% agree with your DA, which is, justice should be blind. It shouldn't matter the color of your skin, the sex, any of that stuff. I mean, we should look at a case based upon the facts
Yes.
and the law and the background of the individual. And when we weaponize the justice system, we fail. That's really
That's
what
right.
we do. We're politicizing it. Yeah.
Whether we're doing it to support one group or another, anytime you do it, you undermine it and it's going to fail. I mean, you could argue that what we're doing right now is we're repeating a lot of the same mistakes that we repeated in the 60s. We felt safe, so we became more lenient. Then we started having more crime. Then we started having this big debate about
Right.
what we should do about crime. And then we had a backlash, which in the 80s, we got Reagan. We had a strong crime bill. So, I mean, you could argue we're just doing we're committing the same cycle, just repeating all the mistakes from the past.
Yes, and I mean, I've always been the one person because people say, "Oh, this pendulum's going to swing." You keep hearing that in California. It's going to swing. It's going to swing. I don't know if it's going to swing, but for me, I want it to just swing in the middle. I don't want it
Yeah.
to swing one far
Well, I
way or the
agree
other
with
way.
you.
I just
I
want to
agree.
be
Yeah.
balanced.
Well, I've even said that, if the left doesn't want it to swing really hard to the right, they better be careful with what they're doing because it's their actions that cause it to swing hard to the right. But I agree with you. I don't want it to be right or left. I want it to be in the middle. And middles, if both sides are not happy, that's probably good.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
That's
we
probably
had an
very good.
election, and right before the election, um, one party came out and said crime's not a problem. This is a made up issue. And so,
Mm.
you have people saying, well, maybe it's not a real issue. And I think they got through the last election. But in the last couple of weeks, we've had some new events, like you've already mentioned, Oakland. The NAACP in Oakland issued a letter just attacking the local elected officials, and they're probably all in the same party. They usually probably used to agree on everything, but it's now saying we need a state of emergency on crime. Now, that to me, I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking about is the ultimate question. Is this a new occurrence? Is this kind of the breaking point? It seems like it's new to me. What are your thoughts?
My thought is the quote unquote DA of Alameda is beyond extreme. She's not, I mean, she's anything but progressive. Her goal, I suspect, is to really dismantle the system. I mean, it's almost shocking to me that she was elected, but, now people are seeing the consequences of her pathetic policies. And, when you have the NAACP come out and say, you're harming our community, that speaks volumes because, you know, there's many folks that support criminal justice reform. I support meaningful criminal justice. I don't support extremism. But, when you have somebody that's 17 years old that murders somebody and now you want to basically treat them with a, slap on the wrist, that is that. And then you've got this lawlessness, these viral videos. And everybody wants to say, oh, well, those viral videos are not 47 or whatever. It's the whole tenor of chaos is what's happening.
Hmm, hmm.
That's really what it is. It's lawlessness. It's chaos. It's lack of consequence. If you send a message to criminals that Oakland is the place to come to, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to come there
Absolutely.
and they're going to victimize people, innocent people there.
When I look at, the criminal justice system has a conveyor belt because on average, every week, there's about the same number of cases added to the conveyor belt, and you got to get off the same number or you're going to get a bigger backlog. And this whole
Right.
creation of chaos, this 80% failure to appear rate just means you can't get cases off of your conveyor belt and just builds an
Yeah.
increasing backlog. And like in Harris County last August, I looked at their disposition list for their misdemeanor courts for the month of August, and
Mm.
90% of them were dismissed. So it creates
Wow.
great pressure on the courts to dismiss cases or otherwise collapse under the weight of their backlogs.
Right. Yeah. And then you have the backlog of COVID, which only added to the
Oh, yeah.
to the
Well, and,
backlog. So
like we should have expected that. I mean, it's like we're shutting everything down, but crime continues, and we didn't file a bunch of cases, but then we started having a big problem. And yeah, I mean, it's like, that's another expected result, but nobody seems to have thought about it at the time. Well,
yeah,
some of the things in this letter says the problems in Oakland have gotten out of hand. This is a quote. Some people go miles away to go shopping because they are afraid they might get robbed at their local store. I mean, residents now know that help will not come when danger confronts them. Worse, criminals know that too. Now that's coming from the NAACP.
yeah, and I think the other thing is that, I don't know how many officers there's down, but I can guarantee you it's a lot,
Mhm.
because of it's a difficult profession. I mean, who wants to be a cop anymore? You've got hundreds of officers down, which affects staffing levels and response times. And so, yeah, I understand it. People want to be safe. That's the number one thing in their life. They want to feel safe in their neighborhood or their homes or their communities. And people don't feel safe right now. And imagine the people that can't afford to go 20 miles
Yes.
from their home. What impact does that have on them?
Or worse, when the store closes because they can't withstand $25,000 a day of shoplifting. And so what happens to that family that cannot afford to drive 25 minutes or 20 minutes to go get their necessities, and now they don't have a local place to go? I mean, that's what's happening.
That's what's happening.
Well, I found it interesting that the district attorney who you mentioned that she actually gave, or her office gave, a response to the letter, and it said, "We are disappointed that a great African American pastor, because it was a NAACP and a pastor, said, and a great African American organization would take a false narrative on such an important matter." I mean, that's essentially the same
Yeah,
argument that was being made before the last election. It's not really an issue. And so they're saying
yeah.
crime's not rising. It's not a real problem. I mean, I thought that was just a fallback to the national narrative.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect her to say that, "Yeah, you're right." I mean, she just wants to defend what she's doing, and it's just to me, it's just again, the fact that it's in NAACP speaks volumes about the fact that they want their community to be safe, and they're not.
What
They're not safe.
what was shocking to me is that the NAACP and a local pastor would come out publicly and issue a letter. And then it's not surprising what the response would be, but it was just as surprising to me that the regional NAACP came out supporting the local NAACP and calling for a state of emergency on crime. It's got to be really bad for the NAACP and the regional NAACP saying essentially the local DA is a liar and we've got a big problem.
It's a very sad state of affairs. I mean, a lot of this, for those of us in the justice system that watched that race, that knew what the current DA was like, knew that this was predictable. And you do the best you can to educate the voters, but you know, sadly, she was voted in. Hopefully, she'll get recalled.
Well, I agree with you. I just don't think that the current situation is there, it's not sustainable. I mean, we're seeing collapses of inner cities, and we're the very minority groups that they're saying they're protecting are the ones that are going to be the biggest victims of it.
Right.
But so it seems like maybe now we have both sides acknowledging for the first time maybe there's a problem. But how do we fix this?
You fix it by one elections. I mean, the reality is, election has the common phrase, elections have consequences. In San Francisco, they elected a similar type of DA named Chesa Bodine. They recalled him and threw him
Mhm.
out. That effort is being undertaken in Alameda County. There's an effort in LA to get rid of Gascon. So, but this, to me, the most important thing is that voters need to, when they walk into a polling booth or they get their ballots or whatever, that they educate themselves and talk to folks that really understand the system. And then the other part about it is we need to change some statewide laws. We need to reverse 47, not completely, but we need to have accountability. We need to deal with theft because they've decriminalized it to the point that it's rampant. It is rampant. I
Mhm.
mean, you can't really go into a store if you're observant enough, you'll see theft. Maybe not the first time or the second time, but it's all over the internet. It's all I see every time I'm looking at whatever Twitter or X or whatever. It's all it is. And so we've got to change elected officials that are not supporting good public policy, and we've got to um, educate ourselves and vote for the right types of folks.
Well, I kind of go back to California, the original problem. I mean, it seems like the original problem is still there. To fight crime, you're going to have to build bigger capacity or more capacity for the state prison system.
Well, I don't think the political will ever be there for that in
Wow.
California. But let's take that off. Let's assume that's not a possibility.
Hmm.
What is a possibility is to invest more money in the true meaningful rehabilitation. And for goodness sakes, don't let them out, at half their sentence if they haven't done it, because that doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help that inmate, doesn't help the victims, it doesn't help society. I mean, what's the point of the system if we're just going to just open up the doors without any meaningful accountability and without
Well,
any
yeah, I
real
agree with
rehab?
that. I mean, we have to have accountability, but without accountability, I mean, okay, so we're not going to build more capacity, so that limits the options. That means we only have to we have to focus on violent criminals. Continues the status quo of why do we even have misdemeanor courts? You're only, I mean, if you're just dismissing everything, nobody's showing up. You can't do anything for them. You can't go get them because it's a misdemeanor. I mean, I shouldn't tell this story because it probably speaks very poorly of me. But during COVID, I got mad. I got mad about criminal justice reform. I got mad about how we were just letting everybody out of jail. So, I got a ticket for not renewing my registration on my car. And I'm like, Can't arrest me for that. So I'm not doing it. I'm not paying it. And so 6 months later, I got a second one. And I'm like, ha ha ha, you can't arrest me.
Let's
I
see what
mean,
happens. Yeah.
and so then I thought, well, I'm just going to take the sticker off my car so they can't see it. So a year later, I get a ticket for no registration,
Right.
expired registration. And by then, they have suspended my driver's license for not paying tickets. And so, you look at that and you go, okay, well, now I have to fix all this. Really haven't made my point, and it's going
Right.
to cost me a lot of money. And so you're like, well, looks like all these laws are not really for criminals. They're for the law abiding citizens. Because if a criminal just, they don't care. They just
Right.
steal something. It wouldn't hurt them at
Right.
all. And it cost me thousands of dollars to make my point that they couldn't arrest me. But for me to be able to participate in society, they had other things. I mean, the biggest one was if I just paid the ticket on a suspended driver's license, they would have suspended my driver's license again. So I had to go in and get deferred
Hmm.
so that I wouldn't
Hmm.
have that. I mean, it's like crazy. I mean,
Right.
the laws are written for the people that follow the laws, not for the people that don't. I mean,
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the part that we've created this system. It's like, to me, I look at it like parenting. I mean, if we don't impose consequences,
yeah,
the kids are just going to run, chaos again. They're just going to keep taking advantage of it, and at some point, you have to have accountability. Period. That's it.
I think that's the key. And, I look at all these consequences, and when you build a system where you can't do anything,
Right.
well, then it's just going to continue to snowball out of control. And that's the way I look at California. If they don't change course, I mean, when people argue with me, hey, we've got more people in jail than any other country, and that's not right. And I'm like, every country in the world sends their drugs to us. Of course, we're going to have a
Yeah.
disproportionate number of crime because we have a disproportionate amount of drugs in our country. And until we address that, we're going to continue to have these problems. And so until crime starts going down, don't think we have enough prisons.
I definitely think that, and sadly, our country has more violent crime. That's just a reality of
Mhm.
what, when people sit there and say, "Oh, look at this country or that country, and we don't have as much prison population." Okay, but we also sadly have more violent crime.
Sure. Well, when we look at, we deal with bail bond issues and we deal with criminal justice reform, and we talk about, we always say, hey, why does the bail industry have such a lower failure to appear rate than just simple release, which would be released on no bail? And
Mm.
it's like, well, the bail, you can see why if you take a step back, you like they provide accountability, they require supervision, and then if you're not checking in, then they're notifying the court and letting them know. But you know what? If the courts don't care if someone shows up for court, you don't need the bail industry. If
Right,
you care that someone shows up for court,
right,
then you want to encourage as many people as possible to be on a bond from the private industry because they get people to court quicker, they get people more often,
right,
and you can get justice for victims. But until we start caring that people show up for court, you don't need bondsmen as much.
right, right.
What if you were talking to another state that was talking about, well, we need to reduce our prison population, or we need to look at some of the things California did, like Prop 47? What would your advice be to them?
Well, I'd say, well, do not pass a law like Prop 47 because it doesn't achieve. It's only gotten worse. Homelessness and drug addictions got just exploded in this state. Listen, I think there's a meaningful conversation of criminal justice reform that needs to be had. There's ways to get to it that, to me, that again, it goes back to that same thing I keep saying, which is the balance of accountability and rehab. But these wholesale policies that are letting people out, whether it's zero bail, whether it's early releases, whether it's decriminalization of drugs, those blanket policies without infrastructure, funding, and accountability are destined for failure. That's just reality. I mean, it's letting them out early is not solving the problem.
I had
It's
someone
just
tell me
not.
one time that a government is not good at making individual assessments. Are you now willing to be a productive citizen? You are? Okay, great. We're going to give you mercy and let you out of jail. That it's expensive, and the government's not built for that. And that's the reason why. And instead, we have these across the board types of releases, and because that's what the government is good at, and whether that's good for society or not. And I thought that was a good point, because what hit me hard was individual assessments are expensive for the government to do, and
Hmm.
that's contrary to what they want. They want to save money. They don't want to spend even more money.
Yeah, I think for the purposes of bail, I think what's really, really important is that judges retain that discretion,
Yeah.
because what's happening with a lot of these zero bail policies, or like even LA County judges just basically adopted a zero bail policy. So, but when you don't retain discretion, and the guy has failed to appear 20 times on a zero bail offense, what's the point of all this?
Yeah. Well,
What's the point?
here's the point I would make on that, and I think it's very good. And I think it kind of dovetails with what you said is, if you enact policies that are meant in good intention to address poor issues or mental health issues, but you do it in such a way that you tie judges' hands so they have no
Right.
discretion, then they have no way to address gangs, drugs, or drug addicts. They have no way to address organized crime or career criminals. And so we have, if you even want to say it's well intentioned, and I'm not sure the whole coalition is well intentioned, I think they
Yeah.
intended to create chaos. But even for the well intentioned people, you're tying the hands of judges so that you are perpetuating more crime because they can't address it. Because, like you said, they don't show up 15 times. Well, this is one of those offenses. We have to release them.
Right.
We cannot hold them. We don't care what their criminal history looks like, what their failure to appear history looks like. And what we're talking about today, if that continues in California, there will never be room for them in jail because we've decided that's a low level offense now.
Well, and a lot of times the judge has never seen them. So they get the
Mhm.
ticket in the
Yeah.
field, or they get immediately released. And so they're never coming before a judge. So that's also a huge challenge. That's why I'm sure Mr. Reisig was saying that you got an 80% failure to appear rate. I think it would be an interesting statewide study to show what is the failure to appear rate, because I'm sure it's quite high, very high.
Well, and you go back and you go, I mean, you want to hit the judges and say, why do we have misdemeanor courts if you're dismissing 90% of the cases and 80% of the people are not showing up? And why do we have misdemeanor courts? It looks like a big paper shuffle, and the appointed counsel is just making a killing off of it.
Yeah, but I mean, listen, victims deserve justice.
Oh, I agree with you. We
If we
cannot
just
get
get
rid of
rid of a
misdemeanor
court,
courts.
then
Yeah, we
you know,
can't
what
get
kind
rid
of
of
message are we?
misdemeanor courts, but essentially that's what we're doing.
I'm sure sometimes it feels like that. It's
Yeah.
like a cycle that all you're doing. But every so often you're going to get some. There are some people that commit a crime, and they're tremendously remorseful, and they're going to get themselves on track or in rehab.
Mhm.
And those are the folks that we want to continuously make sure they're coming to court, because that's how you get them back on track.
Well, and I think what we've lost track of is that's the whole intent of the criminal justice system. We want to impose the least amount of pressure on somebody to get them to turn and become a productive citizen. So the first time offender, like you said, very remorseful,
Hmm.
they're so sorry.
Right.
Well, then you want the least amount of pressure. You want them to be successful in their release, so that they don't come back. But what we're
Right.
doing is for the ones that have been through the system and have learned that the system is not going to have any accountability, no matter how many times they come, those people are learning the opposite lesson. And, the point that somebody made to me is, like in LA, there's a city within the city. There's the little small city of criminals that are
Hmm.
living in the bigger city, and those people are running amok. And what scares
Right.
me is we have this little city outside of that, the little gray area where they're trying to decide, am I going to be a member of Law City, LA, or Crime City, LA? And some of
Right.
them are looking at what's happening. They're going, ooh, I'm going to join the Crime City because nothing's happened to them. And right now it looks like Crime City is growing quickly.
I think the other thing is when you start looking at the population of, like, the transient homeless or unhoused, whatever you want to call it, the amount of crime that occurs within that population is really large. And obviously much of it's not reported. So you're having assaults, domestic violence,
Mhm.
sexual assaults, all of those things, homeless on homeless, or homeless on other folks, or homeless being victims. So it's just more and more of this tsunami of things that are happening, where we're just emboldening people to continue to commit crime.
Well, the homeless issue seems to be one where California just is attracting homeless. I mean, they have like 30% of the homeless population for the United States. And I mean,
Mhm,
what does the future hold in California for homelessness? I mean, it just seems like y'all did a big bond election to address this, and maybe a city or the state,
mhm.
but that's in litigation. It's being mismanaged. And it seems like, I mean, it just seems like issue after issue dealing with homelessness with no resolution in sight.
I think, I've had this conversation many times with my colleagues. I do think we're close to a tipping point. I think California voters are fed up. I think they are tired of seeing their communities being destroyed. And so I think over the next year or two, there's going to be more efforts to change laws. And those are going to be hopefully efforts that are successful. I mean, it's hard, it's expensive to run campaigns. It's a lot of money to get ballot initiatives. Our legislature's not going to do it. As far as I'm concerned, our legislature doesn't have any interest in actually holding people accountable. Many of the folks in the legislature, and so we have to take it to the voters through a ballot initiative. And I think you'll see that in the next 18 months to 2 years because we have to do something different. It's not working.
Well, I would even argue that our elected officials realize, like in California, that they've put themselves in a box because they didn't build additional capacity. They've done these propositions have been done, Prop 47, Prop 59, that have just put them in a box. I mean, they can't admit with this 10, 15-year history that they were wrong. And so they're kind of doubling down because they have no other option. And in California, with the way it is, if they were to admit they were wrong, then there would be three people showing up to run against them.
Well, I also think it's some of the folks in our legislature now are just ideologues. They're just
Mhm.
far extreme ideologues that are not in line, in my opinion, with what the real constituents of California want. I mean, if you saw some of these bills that are coming out of our legislature, you'd be like, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" I mean, it's just shocking to me. But the volume of these bills is so high. The average person, again, is just raising their kids. They don't have the time, the ability, the capacity to sit there and study all these bills and call up, you know, Reggie Jones Sawyer and say, why are you passing a bill like this, or why won't you hear, there's a big fight in California right now about making human trafficking of a child a serious crime. I mean, seriously, there's even an argument about this. Oh no, our legislature doesn't want that to happen because God forbid they actually hold somebody accountable in prison.
But what is the next sign if we're getting to a tipping point? If we think we're kind of at the point where things will change, is it the ballot initiative that will change it maybe in California? Or what are some of the signs that we'll see?
Historically, it's police and prosecutors that kind of can see what's going to happen. I remember being on a phone call before Prop 47 was actually voted on. I was trying to tell the retailers, certain groups of retailers, I'm like, this is not a good idea. This is not going to bode well for your industry. And at the time, they it wasn't as much engagement. I think now, with probably hundreds of millions of dollars lost,
Mhm.
and now their employees are endangered, and they're getting assaulted or shot and killed at a Home Depot or whatever it is. I think we're going to start to see that it's not just police and prosecutors anymore.
Mhm.
It's mayors that are having to deal with what they're seeing. It's businesses, small, medium, large businesses, and it's just everyday people that love California and the diversity we have of geography and people and all that are tired of having the everyday conversation about where they want to move when they leave this beautiful state. I mean, we're at that tipping point because let's be honest, people are leaving, but money people can't afford to leave. And I mean, we really are a beautiful state. It's amazing, but we're destroying it from the inside out.
I think that's a great point on the mayors because I think, this NAACP letter is to the mayors. And I think, even News Nation had a town hall involving mayors, and there was a mayor that was on there that was from one of the urban areas, and she was saying until you have an alternative for the private industry bail system, which has accountability, then you don't have an alternative. And I've never heard a mayor say that yet, but I think that the tax base is probably going to be the tipping point, and also the commercial buildings, because
Hmm.
how long ago was it that we heard, oh, it's just insured, why do we even care, it's insured?
Right,
We're now at the
right,
point where we find out people are not rebuilding when
right.
businesses get burned down. And so I think I think we, you know what? I hope we're at a tipping point. because this is not sustainable. We need to get to the point where we recognize it's not sustainable. And the quicker we get
Right.
there, the better for our community.
That's absolutely right.
I want to thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about these issues, because I didn't know about the history of medical care being the focus that got this all started in
Right.
California. And I think we all need to be careful, because that gives other states the opportunity for federal courts to get involved. And when they get involved, it's not good. And hopefully the Supreme
Well,
Court may even get involved in this Dave's case and come back and just take the rug out from under them and take that away from them. That would probably be helpful. And so that would help as well. And I don't know, maybe they're being counseled that. So, but thank you
yeah,
so
but
much for
thanks for
talking to
having
me. This
me.
has been a
Yeah.
great
Thank,
issue conversation. I loved every minute of it. So,
okay. Well, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it, Ken.
thank you for listening, and come back for the next episode of The Bell Post.